Diego Lopes. He is the talk of the town because what happens? Lando Vannata taking on Tony Ferguson years ago. Vannata drops Ferguson a few times. Forget about new Ferguson. Forget about the one that you've seen lately. But, I mean, you had Lando Vannata on a giant pedestal. Giant pedestal. He looks amazing on short notice against Ferguson. And the career has been kind of 50-50, wishy-washy. He's had a couple fights against Fight of the Nights against Bobby Green. And that's good, because Green looked good against Ferguson his last time out. But there's always fighters that automatically, look at that. Through the gate, this guy is a star because he looked amazing against a top 10 fighter in Movsar Evloev on days' notice. And Lopes, I mean, if it's like one of those guys that you're like, that guy got Hall of Fame votes. Diego Lopes is getting those Hall of Fame votes. He really is like getting those top tier quarterback votes if you're on the Ryan Russillo podcast. Like, Diego Lopes is that hotness because of how good he looked against Movsar Evloev. But Matt and I talked about this quite a bit. And if you guys aren't getting your Matt Allen fix, I'm going to throw it on over to a clip of us talking about Diego Lopes about to make that debut against Movsar Evloev because we were high on this guy coming into the UFC. Diego Lopes beat 3 UFC vets before he even fought on Contender Series. And I hate to break it to you folks, he finished all 3 of them. Like, this guy is incredibly impressive. And you might recognize him out of the Champ Camp Lobo Gym with Irene Aldana. You were talking about Alessandro Costa that's now in the UFC. But I say Champ Camp because Aleksa Grasso is kind of the poster child for that camp now. But Matt, when you look at a guy who has a John and Kate +8 flow in the front and occasionally a little bit of salad out the back, Diego Lopes being a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and having gotten into Jiu-Jitsu at 5 years old, this is a guy that's going to be billed as a specialist in that discipline. He has, 19 of 21 wins by finish. But, I mean, 8 of them are by knockout. When you watch him use his hands, and I'll go through some of these fights, oh boy, does this guy ever have some hands. Like, he is a lot of fun to watch.
He does have a lot of nice strengths in his skill set. You bring up some of the grappling, and he does have great grappling. A really control-heavy fighter, too. Like, he does seem to have quite a bit of weight to him. Not just someone who is fishing for submissions constantly, but he does have great power on his feet, too. And we talked about some of the boxing combinations before we started to film. He has a great left hook. He has good body shots. The only thing, though, that I don't love about him on the feet is at long range, there's not a ton of kicks to really close that distance. And he's not throwing a ton of volume like a Calvin Kattar guy or like a Max Holloway to where he could really overwhelm you on the feet. That's the one thing that did stand out in some of his fights. Yes, he is having success in the striking, but there's some times in his fights where there's a minute, 90 seconds that go by where him and his opponent are both just kind of staring at each other in the mirror. And yes, he does have a lot of experience, which is nice to see, but I will be very curious to see if that kind of a game plan or that kind of a style is going to work against a guy like Evloev, because it is almost a disservice, because let's just be very honest about this right now. Anybody fighting Movsar Evloev with any kind of notice is up against an uphill battle, right? Like, this is a ranked fighter in one of the best divisions in the UFC. So hopefully Lopes can just give us a really solid fight. But this is one of those really difficult situations to throw him into where I think we do have a very promising young prospect who can make a lot of improvements and continue to get better. But they're doing him no favors at all, bringing him in on short notice to take on Evloev.
He's 28 years old, and I mean, he's 21-5. He's not a prospect anymore. This is a fully seasoned professional fighter and a coach out of a big gym now. So I'm not going to call him a prospect in any terms, but I do agree with you in a sense. You know, we've seen it out of some of these fights. His fight against Glenn, his fight a little bit against Rodriguez with Lux in his last time out, where there were periods where he wasn't necessarily as active. But if you go back and you watch the fights leading up to Contender Series, the guy was absolutely wild on the feet. Look at the fight he had to Joe Anderson Brito. So go back to that fight. They're at par going into that one because Lopes had beaten a much higher level of competition than Brito had. You go into it, they strike, they get a little bit wild, and then Brito gets the takedowns. But what happens? I mean, Lopes off his back is threatening Camur sweeps. Then he goes for the arm bars. He nearly has a guillotine in the second round. And in the second round at the start, there's a little bit of a warning from referee Tayoni. Hey, watch out for the eye poke. And then in the third round, what happens? One single jab, I guess wrong hand, jab by Lopes and an eye poke from Brito. By rights, you would assume that that was going to be either no contest or disqualification. They don't go to disqualification. They go to a technical decision. And on all 3 judges' scorecards, round 1, round 2, Brito, round 3, because one punch was thrown by Lopes. So Lopes gets the round. But if you do look at it overall, he goes over with fury. He fights for a title against a guy that you might recognize in Nate Richardson. I thought it was a really close fight. I know 48-47s across the board, and it was split 2 to Richardson to 1 to Lopes. But if I did watch it, I mean, I thought the first 3 rounds, I thought for sure that Lopes had won 2 of them, kind of playing into a 3-round atmosphere here. You look at his fight against Glenn, he drops him with a combination where he goes uppercut, left hook, and he drops him. And then to finish off the fight, I mean, you're talking about combinations on a leg kick attempt from Glenn. All of a sudden, he throws his right hand out there to meet it. And he throws his right hand a lot like Jared Gooden does at welterweight, where it's it comes out and he paws with his fist as he throws it. He drops him. It's over. He finishes up with some hammer fists. And then again, in the fight against Rodriguez, it was that right straight, the hammer fist. So you look at a guy like Lopes, all of these finishes, again, forever going to be slept on. And when you compare him to a guy who's ranked 10th in a Shark Tank of division. So when you do consider this matchup, this is the really weird part about it. I mean, you look at a guy like Diego Lopes. We talked about some of his striking, but if it's not all there, it's not all there. And you look at the way that he was able to perform against Savloyev, he looked like he was lights out. And again, for Gavin Tucker, you look at that debut that he had against Sam Sicilia, and I really do wish that Matt was a part of the video a little bit more than just that clip from the last time we talked about Diego Lopes, because we were in the building for Gavin Tucker's UFC debut in 2017 against Sam Sicilia. And I'm not being hyperbolic, and I'm not trying to oversell it. That was the loudest pop I've ever heard in my life for somebody. And he's out of Western Newfoundland. He trains. He lives in the HRM. He's out of Dartmouth. And he's training at, and I'll bring it up right here now, Tower 1 Combat Sports. He's been a Titans athletics guy for a while. Obviously, people know the Halifax scene for MMA. I already touched on it. John McDessie, TJ Grant. There's been some really big fighters out of Halifax, and Halifax has had big cards. I mean, you remember the main event of the card that Tucker debuted on. That was, look, I got props for this. That was Derek Lewis taking on Hapa. You had Travis Brown and Derek Lewis. That was the main event of that card. Rory McDonald took on Tarek Safadine years ago. David Shaw of the UFC talks about going back to Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada, and Halifax regularly enough. So when you do consider it, I think it is pretty cool that way. Gas saying, hey, I got an idea. Craig Matt, why don't you pre-record the show, then play it live so we could chat about it together? I've done that before. Those are premieres, and people get all crossed up. They don't know if it's live or premiere. So we'll do it live, and sometimes we do it that way as well. But when you do look at, Gavin Tucker and the way that he gets it done, it's his speed and it's his power. And if you want to see really good Gavin Tucker performances, the Sungwoo Choi win, who's gone on a bit of a run since, the Justin James fight, and then when Gavin Tucker beat Billy Q, he was on fire. That was his best performance. Now, that fight was years ago. That was UFC 256, Figueiredo versus Moreno, their first fight. That was December 2020. Tucker comes right back. He takes on Dan Ige, and in that fight, Tucker is a slight underdog. He loses it. And he's been rumored in a couple of fights against Pat Sabatini, one in 2021, one in 2022, and I know he was rumored in one this year, and none of those fights could materialize. Matt and I saw Gavin Tucker at FLA, Fight League Atlantic, number 2 in Moncton, and I tweeted about it October 16, 2021. He cornered his teammate Mathieu Tarantini. Tarantini did not win that fight. But when I look at a guy like Gavin Tucker, it is the speed. I wouldn't necessarily look at those submission wins in this fight. I know he's got 6 of them, but I wouldn't anticipate him getting it done by submission against the jiu-jitsu coach at Lobo Gym MMA and a guy who's like legit and credentialed on the ground. So when you look at it for Tucker, how far has he fallen off? How bad have the injuries been? And at 37, does he still have the speed that he used to have at this weight class? And for Diego Lopes, can he just not get hit? I mean, is he able to kind of dictate some of this one? Austin Laxon hanging out there in the chat, having a good time. But yeah, I think this is a tricky one because of the layoff with Gavin Tucker. I can't wait to see him back. I mean, like, people around here get excited for a Gavin Tucker fight being a local guy out of Atlanta, Canada. And I myself, selfishly, because of that connection with you, the debut in 2017, I get really excited about it too. Matt in the fight going with Diego Lopes to get the win. Tucker's one of those guys. I mean, again, if he beat Dan Ige, and I picked him to beat Dan Ige, I thought Tucker was going to go on a run to the top 15 of 145 pounds. It never happened. And now with the layoffs, 1,791 total votes, 77% Lopes, 55% by submission for the 23% that have Tucker, 75% by decision. And with Lopes, if you really want to, critique a fight that Gavin Tucker had years ago that he might not have looked his best in, You look at the fight that he had against Ricky Glenn, he could not get it going. That fight was in Western Canada. So for me, I will go with Diego Lopes as well in this one. But if Gavin Tucker, wins and I have to eat some crow, I'm absolutely fine with it. Because when that guy is on, he's a 5-tool player. And Gavin Tucker is a really special athlete. And he's a Joe Rogan favorite as well. So I think this fight's going to be an awesome one. Both Matt and myself going with the Brazilian out of Mexico in Diego Lopes to get the win. Mr. Solid in the front, party in the front and back. Lopes to get the win. Next fight on the card, 205 pounds. They need stars. We have Dustin Jacoby taking on Kenny Nzechukwu. Just outside of the rankings. You're not going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.